So this is our 4th year of MyCity Academy, and I don't know if you know this, but this program is the first of its kind in the country. So it is a really cool thing. This year's program was also harder to get into than it ever has been before. So if you're here, congratulations, because the selection process was pretty tough. I should also note that we have with us today a number of journalists from around the world who have planned their visit in timing so they could come and watch part of this program today. So if you see people around in the back with cameras, that's who they are, and they may come up and just chat with you if that's okay with you. So I want to give us all a chance, all of the class members, a chance to introduce themselves. But before we do that, I just want to run through the day really quickly and then tell you just a little bit about the Mayor's Office of New Americans. So you're in for a really great day today. We're going to do introductions this morning, and then at 10 o'clock, Mayor Dean will be with us. After that, Dr. Carol Busey, who's the Metro historian, will come, and she is going to tell us about the history of Metro, the history of Nashville government and how it was formed. We're going to do a tour of the library, which if you haven't been in this space before, I'm so glad you're here now because it is awesome. We are going to have a delicious Kurdish lunch, which was provided for us so generously by the Salahuddin Center. We are going to meet with Andrea Blackman, who works here at the library and has been so helpful in setting this all up. And she's going to tell us about Nashville's rich civil rights history. And Jim Hester, who directed the campaign to defeat English only, which you'll hear all about this afternoon. We'll be here to talk about that as well. So it's going to be a great day. It's going to be a really full day. All of our days are going to be really full, so get ready for it. And you know, so you'll after each class, we'll send you all an email about the next class. And I know that you guys know some of what you'll be learning, but you're going to have a chance to learn all about Nashville's infrastructure in this course. You're going to learn about our social services. You're going to learn about Metro Council and our court system, and you'll meet with the public defender and the district attorney. You're going to learn about our police force and how that works. You're going to learn about education and economics and finance, and I think it's going to be a really great program, and it is brought to you actually for the first time by the Mayor's Office of New Americans. And so I want to just tell you a little bit about that, and then we'll get to introductions of all of our class members. But so I think, to me, the story of the Mayor's Office of New Americans really started in 2009. And if you were here in 2009, you probably know a lot about this. But in 2009, there was a referendum that would have required Metro's government to do business only in English. And at the time, it was a really scary thing, because if it had passed, we would have been the largest city in the country with that kind of requirement. But what it did, it ended up being, I think, a great thing, because it required our community to come together and stand up and say, this is not the kind of community that we want to be. We are a welcoming place. And so, led by Jim Hester, who you'll meet with later today, our community came together and defeated that resoundingly, 57%. And after that, so many programs, particularly at the Metro level, a lot of nonprofits had been doing things for a long time in this community. We have a really strong nonprofit community, and they'd been working for a long time to empower immigrants. But Metro government, starting in 2009, started a number of different programs that are now all housed under the Mayor's Office of New Americans. But in 2009, Mayor Dean created the Mayor's New Americans Advisory Council. That is a group of 15 community leaders. Almost all of them have been through MyCity Academy. Some of the ones who are new, like Leah back there, she's a new member, and she's going through MyCity Academy right now. So MyCity Academy has been this great kind of funnel to help us identify community leaders to sit on this committee. But they meet in the mayor's office once a month, and they really advise him on issues in the immigrant and refugee communities. And then we work with them, and so I meet with them. It's the second Tuesday of every month, and I can say, hey, we want to do this program to empower immigrants. What do you think? And after 6 years, we have the trust and the communication where sometimes they say, no, that's a really bad idea. We don't think that's going to work. But sometimes they say, yeah, that's great. We should definitely do that. So the New Americans Advisory Council has been a wonderful program. In 2012, we started this program, MyCity Academy, and as I think you'll see, it really is going to be neat. And it's been so successful that it's being replicated in places like Bowling Green, Kentucky, and Salt Lake City, Utah. All over the place, I get calls all the time from people wanting to do this. So I hope that by the end you say, oh yeah, I definitely see why they want to copy this. It's a really neat thing. We also have a program, and you'll see part of it on your tour today, We are the third of our kind in the country to partner with the federal government to make our libraries, and the first in the country to make our community centers the first stop on the path to citizenship for lawful permanent residents here in Nashville. So some of you may even fall into this category, but we have more than 18,000 people here in Nashville who are eligible to become citizens, but who haven't for one reason or another. And sometimes that's just a simple lack of access to information. And so what we've done is made, with a partnership, the libraries have been huge leaders in this, and our community centers as well. We've made about 10 locations in the city the home of a New Americans Corner, where you can go, excuse me, and find the citizenship application, study guide materials, and all kind of the paper that you need to apply for citizenship and then to study for the test. But it's more than that too. At these locations, there's also free ESL and civics classes. So you can, sometimes one of the barriers for people in Nashville is they don't speak English well enough to take the test. And so trying to address that issue, and all their staff has been trained to help direct people to resources. So that's another really cool program. It's called Pathway for New Americans. And then I'll tell you about just a couple more. Pathway for New Americans is wonderful. We also started a program called Parent Ambassadors, and that was an idea born of the Mayor's New Americans Advisory Council. And they came to the mayor and they said, hey, you know, our schools do a lot to reach out to immigrant and refugee families, but we still feel like there's some information gaps. And there's still more we want to know. And so working with Metro Schools, we created a program called Parent Ambassadors, and we actually have some parent ambassadors here with us today. But the idea is that these folks serve as ambassadors for folks from their home country who speak their home language. And so when you enter the school system, you can have somebody that you can really relate to, and they can answer questions for you. In addition to what the school staff already does, you have somebody who's kind of special for you. So that's a neat one. And our newest one is MyCity Connect. There's flyers in the front of your folders about this. But one of the things we heard from our MyCity grads, and we have almost 100 now, is we love getting to know each other during our year, but then we don't really get to see each other again. You know, you have these 7 months together and you get really close. And we wanted to find a way to harness that and to keep you all getting to know each other. And so we created something called MyCity Connect. And the idea is, if MyCity Academy is all about teaching you about Metro government and how that works and how you can access it, MyCity Connect is about our really fun civic and cultural institutions. And so our first MyCity Connect was this past Saturday, and I know some of you in this room were there, and we all met at Southeast Community Center, and there was line dancing and boot camp and indoor soccer and basketball and badminton. Everybody had lunch with the mayor, and it was a lot of fun, and the idea was just to keep people connecting with each other. So the next MyCity Connect, and you'll see it in your folder again, is April 22nd, and that one is about volunteering. So Nashville has a really rich history, and you know, Tennessee is known as the volunteer state. Nashville has a really rich history of people coming together and volunteering, and Second Harvest Food Bank has done a lot lately, even particularly in the ice storms, with getting food to kids who weren't getting food from their schools. And so we thought it would be great to go and help pay them back by volunteering. So you'll have breakfast with the mayor, you'll learn about the volunteer opportunities in Nashville, and then you actually will do some volunteering right there. So that's a really neat thing. So this fall, we combined all of those programs under the Office of New Americans. We're one of the first in the South and only the 15th or so in the country. And so the Office of New Americans runs all these programs, and we partner with a lot of nonprofits to do a lot of other things, but MyCity Academy is probably the best thing that we do. So I run that, and we have some wonderful fellows who are here with us who really help. We would not be able to do what we did without them. So you will meet Morgan and Nicole throughout these sessions. In just a second, I'm going to ask Louisa, who introduced herself, who is the wonderful co-chair of the New Americans Advisory Council and herself a MyCity graduate. She is going to come up here and introduce Mayor Dean, so I will turn things over to her.
Good morning. It's a real pleasure for me to be here introducing Mayor Dean. You have heard a lot from Shauna already about some of the tangible things that he has done to make Nashville a welcoming place for all of us, specifically, well, everyone, but New Americans as well. So I just want to say a couple of things. One, Mayor Dean may not even remember this, but a couple of years ago, he spoke at a conference that we organized, and we manage a lot of federal funds, and there were a lot of people there from the federal government, including from the State Department. And our representative that was speaking, after he finished his remarks, leaned over and said to her colleagues at the table, she was overheard to say, "Why can't all our mayors be like this?" And that's a very valid question, but also I think is a testimony to not just the things that Mayor Dean has said about welcoming refugees and immigrants and how that makes our city a more vibrant and better city, but the really tangible things that he's done to make that happen, not least of all MyCity Academy. It started as an idea that Ana Escobar came to him with. He not only said that's a great idea, but he made it happen. He assigned staff from his mayor's office to recruit participants, to get engagement from department heads and staff from all across Metro and city government. So it is with great gratitude as a Nashvilleian, as co-chair of the New Americans Advisory Council, to welcome Mayor Dean.
Well, thank you, Louisa, for that introduction and all that you've done over the many years that you've been the co-chair of the New Americans Advisory Council. Before I get started, I want to recognize Andrea Blackman and the rest of the staff here at the library for hosting us today, and to say thank you. We have a great library system here in Nashville, and I'm so happy to be here. And I want to thank the Salahadin Center, which is generously donating today's lunch. Thank you to them. The journalists who are with us today from around the world are part of a State Department tour, and we hope that they take this idea of MyCity Academy back to their countries. And finally, I want to welcome the class of 2015 to MyCity Academy. This is an impressive group that truly represents the rich diversity of our city. The 36 of you come from 23 different countries, including 11 that have never before been represented by MyCity Academy, and from parts all over our city. This year's selection process was the most competitive yet, so congratulations for getting selected. You are part of this class because we know that you're going to get a lot out of it, and that you'll share what you've learned with your communities, your colleagues, and your neighbors. You should be very proud to be here. This program is the first of its kind in the nation, and just by being here, you're helping us make history. I think you're in for a great experience. This session of MyCity couldn't come at a better time. I know it's not a surprise to any of you that, like so many places in our country, our city is rapidly becoming more diverse. Today, nearly 12% of our population was born outside of the United States, and nearly half of those people are recent immigrants who entered the country since 2000. In fact, by 2020, the majority, 50.1% of Nashville's population, will be people of color. By 2030, that number will be 59%, and by 2040, it will be 68%. As these numbers illustrate, the face of our city is changing rapidly, and I think that's a good thing. There is no higher compliment the city can receive than when a family who is new to this country, a family who could choose to locate any place in the United States, chooses to make their home in Nashville. As mayor, I'm proud of so many things about Nashville, but one of the things that makes me proudest is the way that we have embraced our changing demographics and worked to ensure that Nashville is an open, welcoming place that respects and embraces the differences among us. MyCity Academy is one of the best examples of those efforts. It arose from our belief that everyone in our city should have access to the inside scoop about how government works. MyCity will give you an insider's knowledge of our government, and I hope it will empower you to continue to be involved not only in our government, but also in our community as a whole. This program is in its 4th year, and one of the things I don't think we could have predicted when it began is how much of an asset it is to the government itself. Thanks to MyCity Academy, we have deepened the relationship between the city and many new American communities in Nashville. We have learned from each other, and by doing so, we have made our city stronger. Now, I want to tell you a little bit about my role as mayor and about how Nashville government works. And then I look forward to answering your questions. As mayor of the consolidated government of Nashville and Davidson County, I represent all of the city's nearly 650,000 residents. Since I was elected in 2007, I've been working on 3 priorities that we have to get right as a city, which number 1, education, 2, public safety, and 3, economic development. This is my last year in office, and I'm proud to say that we have made progress in all of these areas. One of the things that I think folks should understand, because it's real important to the city, and it's one of the most significant things that happened in Nashville in the past 50, 60 years, was the formulation or the creation of the metro government. In 1963, and we celebrated this a year and a half or so ago, the citizens of Nashville voted to consolidate the city government, the Nashville government, with the county government, Davidson County. And so when you talk about my title is, I'm the mayor of Nashville and Davidson County. We have one government for the city and the county, and that is different than all but one other city and county in the state of Tennessee. And the reason it's so important and why I say it's a major thing in the history of Nashville is that it made us a much more efficient city. It made us a much larger city. For the area, I'm mayor of an area that is basically 530 square miles. And what it does for efficiency, instead of having a whole series of towns or cities in the county, we have one public works department, one water department, one parks department. With the exception of a couple small cities, we have one police department, one fire department. And that allows us to avoid duplication. It allows us to do things in a more cost-effective way. And I think that's a big part of Nashville's economic success, that it's very attractive to businesses, it's very attractive to people to work in an environment where there aren't multiple layers of local government, and it's very attractive to work in a city where the tax rate is, compared to other cities, lower. We have the lowest tax rate of any of the 4 major cities in the state. In terms of the issue of education, we believe that students and their parents now have more school choices. With public safety, the police have more officers than ever. Homicides in Nashville in 2013 and then again in 2014 reached 50-year lows. The economy in Nashville is booming. Companies are moving to Nashville. Companies are expanding in Nashville. And it seems like new offices, restaurants, and hotels are opening every day. But we can never check the box on those things. I mean, one of the things I talked about in '07 when I was running for mayor for the first time was that there is a connection between those priorities. That if you're going to have a great city, it's got to be a city that has good schools. And you're only going to have good schools if people feel safe going to school, if they feel safe being part of the city. And you're only going to have good schools if you have a strong economy that creates the tax base to finance schools. And so those things are related to each other, and they're almost just one priority. But the more I've done this, I also know with those priorities, you never say, we got that done. I would be the last person after doing this for 7.5 years to say, well, we're done with schools. Or public safety, there's a lot of good news there, but we're not making that a priority anymore. It has to remain a priority. Economic development, there's a lot of jobs here. We're doing better than the most cities in the country, but we got enough jobs, we got enough opportunity. You never have enough jobs, you never have enough opportunity. So those priorities, I think, will remain, and those will always be a focus for the city. I have a staff that helps me do the work of the city. There are about 25 people who work in the mayor's office. I think that number sometimes seems surprisingly low to people. My office has a number of smaller offices within it. We have the mayor's office in neighborhoods, which focus on making the neighborhoods all around us informed and connected to the city. We have the mayor's office of economic and community development. They help bring new businesses and jobs to Nashville. And of course, we have the mayor's office of New Americans. We've opened that office last fall, and already it's done a lot of work to empower immigrants and refugees and to help ensure that members of the receiving community understand and appreciate our growing diversity. Although I'm mayor, I am not all-powerful by any means. Like most governments in the United States, our city government is divided into different branches. We have the executive branch, which is essentially the mayor's office and all the departments of the city: public works, police, fire, water, on and on. We also have a legislative branch, which is, of course, the Metro Council. And we have a judicial branch, which is really a mixture of the city and the state. The judicial branch, General Sessions Court in particular, but also the state trial courts enforce our laws along with state laws. As mayor, I'm the head of the executive branch. I oversee each of the 52 metro departments that help our city run. Each of those departments is led by a department head who reports to me. Department heads are not selected all in the same way. Nashville is a city in our charter. We created in 1963, when we created metropolitan government, we did that by creating a charter, which is sort of like our Constitution. It describes how our government is set up and how it operates. So in terms of different departments, I select the police chief, I select the fire chief, but I have influence over, but ultimately the parks director is appointed by the parks board. Ultimately, the library director is appointed by the library board. And each scenario is a little bit different, so you can't totally generalize. The legislative branch is headed by the vice mayor, who is Diane Neighbors, who in my opinion has done an outstanding job as her role as the head of the council. The Metro Council is responsible for making some of the laws that govern our city. The Metro Council is a key group when it comes to issues around zoning and land use. They approve contracts, they approve budgets. The mayor's office with the finance director creates the budget, submits it to the council, and then they approve it and make modifications. Our Metro Council has 40 members. And just to put that in context, usually when I go to mayor's meetings around the country and we talk about the council, and we always talk about the council in a very favorable way and nice way, when I tell people that there are 40 council members in Nashville, it's always fun to watch the faces, the expressions of other mayors. They're like, whoa. I think it's the second largest council in the country. The largest is Chicago. Most cities have councils that are probably somewhere between 10 and 20 members. We have a large council for a very good reason. When the metropolitan government was created, remember, we went from just being the old city of Nashville to being a government that encompassed the entire county, 500 square miles. And I think the founders of the metro government wanted to be sure that everybody throughout the city felt like they were getting representation, that they had a direct and immediate contact with the government. And that's why we have a large council. 35 of the 40 are elected by districts. So you all live somewhere in the city, in a council district, and you have a council member representing you. And that would be, in many ways, that person is one of your first contacts with the metro government. All right, so we have 35 district council members, and then we have 5 that are elected at large. I mean, they're elected by the entire county. They're voted on just the way I am or the vice mayor is. And their job is the same as the district council members, but their perspective is supposed to be citywide. And so we have 5 of those. The councils meet on the first and third Tuesday of each month. The council met this week, and the meetings are open to the public, and you can watch them on Metro's channel, Metro 3. They're actually pretty interesting to watch. If you really want to see how the city, what the issues are confronting the city, what people are thinking, it's a useful exercise to watch a council meeting. The judicial branch, as I mentioned, is sort of a combination of state and city, and it handles both civil and criminal cases. The judges in Nashville and the judges throughout Tennessee are elected, and they serve 8-year terms. Civil cases are heard in the historic Metro Courthouse, which is where my office is and where the council meets. And their topics include divorces, contracts, monetary disputes, torts, somebody gets hurt in an accident. Criminal cases are handled in the courthouse behind the historic courthouse, the newer courthouse, which is named after Justice Birch, who was a Nashville resident who became a General Sessions judge and a criminal court judge, then a judge on the Criminal Court of Appeals, and then finally he was the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of Tennessee. He died a few years ago, but he's a great man, and that building is named after him. And the criminal cases range from misdemeanors, such as disturbing the peace, vandalism, all the way up to homicides. These three branches work together for Nashville, and you'll learn more about them in upcoming sessions. But I'll give you an example of how they work together. Every month I have a meeting with members of the criminal justice system, which include the police, the public defender, the DA, but also the judges. And we talk about issues of how we can run the criminal justice system more efficiently. Before I finish up today, I want to encourage you all to attend a new program we just started. It's called MyCity Connect. It was created because we want to give MyCity Academy participants, along with their families and friends, and really everyone in Nashville, a chance to get know more about Nashville's civic and cultural institutions. I saw some of you at the first MyCity Connect event last Saturday at the Southeast Community Center, and I think everybody had a good time. I did. I think it was a big success. Our next MyCity Connect event will be on Wednesday, April 22nd. It's a morning event, so you'll have to get up early, but there's breakfast. And it's going to be held at the Second Harvest Food Bank. Second Harvest Food Bank is a place where a nonprofit that supplies food to people in need. And you'll have an opportunity there to learn about volunteer opportunities in Nashville. I think it should be a great event. And now I would be happy to answer any easy questions. Anybody got anything? Yes.
I don't think my question is easy. So it's about affordable housing. So I know that Nashville has some program, and so what is already in place and what is planning to be done? Because, as you say, Nashville is booming. Business is moving in, and that's what drives the housing prices go up. So, what is the program?
Well, we have programs. I mean, there's all sorts of affordable housing. There's affordable housing that deals with issues that's very important, that deals with issues of homelessness and very low incomes, where there are a variety of programs that the city's involved in through the MDHA, the Metropolitan Housing and Development Authority. And those programs have been historically very dependent upon federal money. And federal money over the course of the last 15 years or longer has steadily not been as great. But we continue to invest in housing through that program. And then there's sort of the affordable housing issue I think you're alluding to, which is more affordable housing for workers, for people who are living in the city, who feel that because of the growth of the city, the growth of population, that it's more and more difficult to buy a home. And there are a variety of things being looked at. I don't think there's a quick answer. I think obviously the city has to work to find ways to create more worker affordable housing, and that's what will be a focus. I can tell you that as an issue has been part of Nashville for some time, but I look back on my first term as mayor, the big issue for us then was the recession. The big issue was that that people needed jobs, people were losing jobs. There was virtually nothing going on in the real estate market, and I think real estate agents would probably had some of the worst years they ever had. And the city has been booming, and then all of a sudden there's this new great demand for housing. And so you're seeing interest in neighborhoods that wasn't there before. You're seeing a lot of construction happening, and that basically is a good thing. I mean, ultimately, the market is going to drive things so that there'll be more development and hopefully more control over prices. Nashville as a city, and I think this is still true, and it's often cited, is that Nashville's cost of living is 89% of the national mean cost of living. I mean, Nashville as a city is not an expensive city overall compared to most cities. In fact, that's one of our main attractions and why we're doing well, is that people come here because their dollar, the money they earn, can go further. But affordable housing will be, I think, a concern, and we're working on some things right now, and it will be an issue for the next, for the next few years, certainly. Yes.
Thank you for being here today. My question was, you had mentioned that this is your last year as mayor.
Right.
I was wondering if you could talk about how initiatives like MyCity Academy and the Office for New Americans is sustainable with other mayors.
Well, I definitely think this is sustainable, and the best way I can probably answer that pretty directly is, as the term limited mayor, the sitting mayor, I don't go to a lot of mayoral political events just because I don't think that's where I need to be. But my understanding is that all the mayoral candidates have been asked whether they support the Office of New Americans, whether they support Nashville being a welcoming, open city, whether they support embracing immigration. And my sense is that all of them do. I've been asked several times this morning by the journalist about what do the people of Nashville think about these issues. And, I don't poll it, I can't give you a scientific answer, but I do pay attention to public opinion, and I do pay attention to what people say to me when I'm out and about in the city. And my sense is that there's broad-based support for this in the community. Nashville, I think, has made a decision to be an opening, welcoming city, a city that wants people to feel they're part of the community, wants to create that environment, and I think that will continue on and won't be limited by a change of administration. There may be differences in emphasis, there may be different ways of doing things, but I don't think there'll be any major change in the atmosphere of the city, because I think Nashvillians support it. That's my sense. I get zero kickback from the public on this. People like it. Anything else?
Now's your chance, guys.
I have one. Okay. I'll stand. I think that we all agree that violence against women is a pretty big issue that affects everybody, regardless of where we come from. And I know that the city has done a lot to try to eliminate that or decrease violence against women. But I'm seeing that we are still lacking a lot of resources for women that speak a different language from women from other countries. I know we have resources like the YWCA and some other resources in the city, but I was just wondering if this is something that you have been discussing, or if there are any plans in the near future to try to bring in more resources to reach out to women that may not be able to ask for help because of the language barrier or just because of cultural differences.
Right. Actually, domestic violence has been a major priority for us, and we have put actually millions of dollars into it in the last few years. And the reason is this. I mean, I talked about how Nashville in 2013 and 2014 hit 50-year lows in homicide rates. If you look at the number of homicides, though, the number that is fairly constant and hasn't moved as much. It's actually gone down a little bit in the recent year, but domestic violence remains pretty much fixed at the same level. And so we have invested money in additional district attorneys. We've actually just put money in through a special supplementary budget to create with a circuit court a special domestic violence docket. We have opened a family justice center to work on domestic violence issues with counselors. It's a major, I think if you put attention on an issue and really focus on it, you can probably get results. And I think that's one of the things that happened with the homicide rate. We're certainly aware of issues, and the police are very aware of issues regarding English as a second language being an issue in terms of being able to report cultural issues. I believe we have at least one fluent Spanish-speaking counselor at the Family Justice Center. The police and the courts have access to almost all languages in terms of providing services. But I would encourage you, if you have thoughts on how the city can do better with specific immigrant groups in terms of language, information, getting the message out that we want to be helpful, that we want to know that there is people on your side who are going to protect you and help, to work with them. And the best person to contact is a woman named Diane Lance, who heads up that, and she will be very responsive to your concerns and your suggestions. Yep. You're the only hand raised.
Thank you so much for coming in. My question is, since your focus is education, just asking whether you have a kind of an assistance to the new American beyond MyCity or someone who wants to go higher with any kind of program that you need to know as a new American.
For schools, we have a program called Partners, Parent what? Parent Ambassadors. And what that is, it was done with the schools in the Mayor's Office of New Americans. It takes a family or individuals who have gone through the school system from a specific immigrant group, and they are ambassadors to work with families that are currently in the school system from the same immigrant group. And I think we have a whole series of different groups represented, and then they work with folks who are in the school system right now. That's been the most direct thing that we've done on that specific issue. Obviously, the schools do a tremendous amount of work on English as a second language and have a variety of programs there. It's one of the things that they've worked the hardest on, I think, for the last 5 years. Oh, and there's a program that we have in my office that we started, I don't know, 5 years ago, called Scholars Academy. And basically what that is, I think they're signing people up for it right now. What that is, it takes, we have 4 to 6 weeks in the summer where high school students can sign up, and kids going from middle school to high school can sign up, where they can get a 4 to 6 week program where it's real. You go to school in the summer, it's free, and it's sort of intense on English and on math. And the idea is, it's for everybody, but the idea is to prepare kids for college and to prepare them to take the tests for college and get ready for college, give them a foot up and a head start. And it also does, it helps bring kids to colleges in the area so that they can understand what opportunities are out there for them. This is a particularly, if you have kids who are thinking about college, and if they're maybe the first person in your family to go to college, this is a really interesting time in Tennessee, because the city of Nashville was involved early on, and the state now has a statewide program. But we essentially work, and they're working on the issue regarding undocumented folks, to hopefully the legislature will approve this, that the state of Tennessee, you're guaranteed that your tuition will be paid to go to a community college or a technical school. And so college as the reality is here. If somebody wants to go to college, they can go to college and their tuition will be paid for at a community college or a tech school in this area. And that's a great opportunity. So if you have kids or you know kids, this is a wonderful way to begin the college process. Thank you all.
All right, well, so Dr. Busey is the Metro historian, and she is here to talk to us about the history of Metro government. So you heard the mayor allude, or he talked a little bit about how we're a consolidated government and what the history is of our government and why that's so important. And Dr. Busey is really the expert in that topic. So we wanted, at the very beginning of this 7-month course, to give you really a good sense of Nashville's history, and here is the best person to do it. She's also a professor of history at Volunteer State Community College. She came here in 1971, and like a lot of us who came here, we just never left. So we are really thrilled to have her here. Her full bio is in your packet, so I encourage you to take a look. But I want to give her all the time that we've got to talk to us about the history of Nashville. So Dr. Busey, thank you so much for being here.
A little tech work here. I'm a pretty low-tech operator, so this will not be too fancy a presentation. But I'm really honored to be here with you today, and I'll be very eager to have a chance to chat with you a little bit later in the morning. So this is such an exciting program that you all are embarking upon. And I wish you the very, very best in your endeavors here as MyCity Academy moves forward for the next few weeks, and you learn all sorts of interesting things about our community here. Because I did come here in 1971. I thought I would get a master's degree and go back to where I came from, which was Texas. And 40-something years later, I'm still around. But you know, we are so proud of this city, and with good reason. And we are very delighted that all of you want to be a part of our community here, because our arms are open wide. We welcome all of you, and we want to do whatever we can to answer any questions so that you will be able to give this talk for me someday. I'm hoping that you will. It's this one right here, I think.
Let's see.
We're getting the tech work done. Yeah, I think we're going. I think we are set. Nashville's history is really the story of a lot of people over a long, long, long period of time. Indeed, since the beginning of time, a group of people, one after another, who came here to our beautiful community, to this beautiful place, referred actually by some, referred to this place as the Eden of the West. People have been coming here for a long time, and they have liked what they saw and came back. Our history is the stories of lots and lots of people who came from different places. They liked the place, they stayed here, and they have all made contributions to our city. So today I want to give you a very brief overview of the history, and this is hopefully just to whet your appetite, and then you'll be eager to go upstairs to the Nashville room or to the archives. There's lots of history here to be learned. The very first people who came into this area were nomadic hunters. This was as the ice ages the ice flow was melting and people were coming across the Bering Straits from Asia into North America and ultimately went all the way down to South America. We know there are at least 3 or 4 migrations of these people who came in. Now, what made this one spot right here so different and so desirable that people wanted to come back? Well, our history here has to start with a little geography lesson, and it is the Cumberland River, which you see here. It flows across Davidson County. It is a river with lots of twists and turns, but in addition to being a magnificent river, it is surrounded by land that sits in a basin, and that is the Cumberland River Basin, or the Central Basin of Tennessee, which is hard rock limestone. Just look anywhere where they're doing road construction and they're blasting, what's the first thing you're going to see? Rocks. Lots of rocks. We sit on a bed of limestone. Now, what made this appealing to these nomadic hunters was that because of our unique geography, the limestone produced salt. And all across Middle Tennessee, even outside of Davidson County, we had these places where salt came up naturally out of the ground that were called licks. And the salt licks attracted animals who had to have salt for survival. They had to have it. And so as the animals would come to this particular salt lick, how many of you know where the Bicentennial Mall is? Not very far from here, just probably half a mile if we could walk down there right now. This is about where the original salt lick was. It fed a creek that flowed into the Cumberland River right about here. People call this creek the Salt Lick Creek. So these nomadic hunters came in and out of the area time and time again, and eventually some of these tribal people began to settle here. Now, by the time the Europeans got to Hispaniola and then to Central and South America, there were some tribal people actually living here. The Shawnees had lived here. However, by the time more Europeans actually got into this area of Middle Tennessee, the tribal people, the Shawnees, had been pushed out. If you imagine down here is Chattanooga, they had been pushed out of here and pushed up over the Ohio River. But even though there weren't people living here at the time the Europeans came to North America, the tribes used this area, again because of this salt lick as well as others, as a common hunting ground. So they were coming in quite regularly hunting, and these animals had beaten these paths which were easy to follow to the salt lick. Now, we did have a European coming in 1540. He didn't come into Davidson County, though. He came into Tennessee, Hernando de Soto, who was a Spaniard, but the Spanish were really looking for precious metals. They were looking for gold, silver, things that could be mined, and they didn't really find any in Tennessee, so they didn't stay. The first Europeans that really come and actually stay here were the French. The French had come in up in Canada, and they had begun coming down the river system, the Mississippi River, which we'll imagine is over here. They would come down the Mississippi River looking for trading partners. The French did not really come in and create large settlements. They brought priests, they brought traders, they brought some military men, but they were interested in trading. So the population of New France, which is in Canada, grew very, very slowly. But the French started looking for trading partners, and they began to come down, they began coming down the Mississippi River to the Ohio River, and then they would get to the Ohio River where two rivers flowed into the Ohio probably 12 or 15 miles apart. One was the river that you and I call the Tennessee River, from a Cherokee word meaning Tennessee, or wide flowing river. And then this other river here, which the French called La Rivière des Sciences des Chansons. And this was the River of the Shawnees. And you can tell that I'm from Texas, where we learned Spanish, and not from Louisiana, where they taught French. But nonetheless, the French came in looking for trading partners. One of them in particular, Timothy de Montbriand, who has a street named for him, came in here and stayed a while. He liked the area. He would stay here in the winter months and do hunting and trapping, and then take the furs he had found here, he had collected, down to New Orleans, where he was able to sell these in the French market. Now, it wasn't long before these English settlers, who were over here on the other side of the Appalachian Mountains, got interested in the land across the Appalachian Mountains. Here is our mighty Cumberland River. If you have not been out on one of Nashville's greenways, you really owe it to yourself, especially now that the weather's getting so warm, to go out and walk on a greenway. I made these photos on the Cumberland River a few years ago, over from the Shelby Bottoms Greenway. It has a pedestrian bridge right across the river. It is really, really a beautiful place. It is the central part of our city's geography. So there was a Scots-Irish man, James Robertson, who lived over here in North Carolina, which was one of Great Britain's 13 colonies. James Robertson, like everyone else in the 13 colonies, was interested in bettering himself. That is why the people who settled in England's colonies came. They saw opportunity here that wasn't available to them back on the British Isles, or certainly in Europe. And so 13 colonies were established, and the population of those colonies grew very, very dramatically, very quickly. So here is James Robertson. He is of Scots-Irish descent, as were most of the original settlers here in Middle Tennessee who came in. He had been, his family had been in Scotland, they had been sent to Ireland, and then they came to the 13 colonies. So he was interested in land surveying and land speculation. He's looking for a place to live. So he heard from a French trader up in the Illinois country that there was this very beautiful place called the Salt Lick Creek, and Robertson called it the French Lick Creek, where animals were abundant. So Robertson began thinking about this, and he began coming across the mountains, first into this corner of Tennessee, right up here. There were some settlers who settled up here, but right before the American Revolution, actually, 1770 and 71. So this population grew, and Robertson was hired by a land operator, somebody who wanted to make money in land, to do some surveying over here. And he had heard how beautiful this area right here was. Now, Richard Henderson, the land speculator that hired James Robertson, he wanted to create his own colony. He wanted to establish a 13th colony. So he decided that he was going to purchase all of central Kentucky and middle Tennessee from the Cherokees who lived over here. Now, you know that the tribal people did not really believe in private ownership of property, and so selling land is kind of an odd idea, except for the fact that the Cherokees, more than any of the other tribes in Tennessee, tried to get along with the the Anglos tried to compromise in the interest of peace. Well, the American Revolution broke out, and even though Henderson felt he had right to this land, nothing was going to be settled. So until this war was won by one side or the other. So in the middle of the Revolutionary War, James Robertson decided he had come over here yet again to examine this place and confirmed his belief that this was really a beautiful place to put down roots. So he partnered with John Donaldson, a Virginia Scots-Irish settler, to lead a group of about 250 people to settle here in Middle Tennessee. The whole idea being, we go over there, we plant a crop, we build a cabin, it will be recognized when the Revolutionary War is over as our property. And thus the plan began for the Scots-Irish to come in here and to create a brand new settlement here in Middle Tennessee. So James Robertson came up with a plan. And keep in mind, there is a very dense forest between here and East Tennessee. So it's going to be very, very difficult to get here. So this was the plan that Mr. Robertson and Mr. Donaldson came up with. Robertson would lead a few hardy men, young men who would walk. You know, we don't have room for a wagon, even if we had a wagon, which they didn't. We will walk up through the Cumberland Gap. We're coming from these settlements over here, up through the Gap, up in through the Kentucky settlements, and then come down to the Salt Lick, the French Salt Lick. Now, we want to take our families with us, and ladies, these men thought that you all would not be able to make this walk, is what it really amounted to. So they decided that Donaldson would lead the older men, the women, and all the children on an expedition that would come by boat. And so it was that the Donaldson party put these very large rafts into the Tennessee River just above Knoxville, and thus began their journey in the fall and winter of 1779. The Robertson party of men got here in late December 1779. According to James Robertson's descendants, they all said that Robertson walked across the Cumberland River on Christmas Day. It froze. It was frozen, and the river froze quite regularly before the dam was built on the Cumberland River. So it's not unusual that the river was frozen, but whether it was precisely Christmas Day or not, we don't know. But that is the lore that has been handed down. So they began waiting for the women. James Robertson was married to Charlotte Reeves Robertson. They had some children, and they waited. January came. No sign of the Donaldson party. February, no sign of the Donaldson party. March, no sign. Have they been killed? Has something happened? Finally, late April of 1780, here come these flat boats. They had come down the Tennessee River through this very hazardous area, the Muscle Shoals. They had gotten to the mouth of the Ohio, where the Tennessee empties into the Ohio, and then from there they had to go upstream with just poles, moving these big flat rafts up the Ohio to the mouth of the Cumberland, and then up the Cumberland all the way to the Salt Lick. They arrived on April the 24th, 1780. And they had the more challenging journey, to say the least. But these people were determined that this was going to be their home. Their settlement was highly contested by the Indians, who had used this as a hunting ground. But these Scots-Irish settlers were determined to stay, and they did hold the land. Now, something I need to make clear about these early settlers, they all came for opportunity. A few of them, particularly the Donaldsons, who had more money than pretty much anybody else, they brought a significant number of slaves. I mean, significant meaning 4 or 5. The Robertsons owned 1 slave. So slavery was here from the beginning of these settlements. Robertson named this community that he was establishing Nashboro, because Francis Nash was a soldier from North Carolina in the Continental Army who had been killed up in Pennsylvania. And so he named the settlement Nashboro. And people began moving over here in pretty quick order. This is a monument to the settlement of Nashville of Robertson and Donaldson that's right down on the river, not too far from here at all. An image of Charlotte Robertson and those flatboats as they came through. So this is how they came. And they got here and they stayed. Lots and lots of people coming from lots and lots of places. And the population grew. One of the people who came in pretty short order was another Scots-Irish named Andrew Jackson. He had been appointed the district attorney, a lawyer for a court system that had been set up by North Carolina. This was considered to be part of North Carolina. And so Andrew Jackson came in as the district attorney. And so here we have Davidson County was created by the North Carolina legislature. They named it for William Lee Davidson, who was another North Carolina soldier who had been killed in the Revolutionary War. And then the North Carolina legislature decided to change the name of this community from Nashboro to Nashville. Because by this time, the Americans had won their independence from Great Britain. Borough was the English word for little town, and the French had been our allies, helped us win our independence. And so the North Carolina legislature changed the name to Nashville. And people began to come. It will not be long before Tennessee becomes a state. 1796, Tennessee becomes a state. Now, I thought I would show you this map of Tennessee because I think it's very interesting in that you've got this pocket of settlements over here in West Tennessee, in East Tennessee, and then you've got these 3 counties here. All of this had been Davidson County, and then Sumner, and then Tennessee County. Those 2 counties were cut out of Davidson. But the reason there was no settlement here was because that was the Great Wall of Tennessee, the Cumberland Plateau. So we were really kind of out here by ourselves. And all of this land was at least technically controlled by Indian tribes. The Cherokee living down here, the Creeks living down here in Alabama, the Chickasaws living over here in what is now West Tennessee, and the Choctaws down here in Mississippi. And our population grew, and every time our population took a bump upward, the lands held by these tribes became a little more uncertain. Their ability to hold and claim their land became more and more uncertain. Now, Andrew Jackson, where's his picture here? Let's go back to Jackson. Andrew Jackson was the general of the Tennessee militia. The militia was just an all-volunteer army to protect the citizens here at home. And in 1811 and 12, lots of Tennesseans wanted to push the Creeks out of Alabama and the Chickasaw out of West Tennessee. The reason? It was perfect land for raising cotton. And so in 1812, the United States again went to war with Great Britain. This is the War of 1812. A lot of conflict between the U.S. and Great Britain, mainly, and one thing was that we really were thinking, the United States was thinking they might like to take that other British colony in North America, Canada, and they also wanted to take this land. We wanted to take this land from the Indians. And so we are summoned by President James Madison to go down into Alabama, our Tennessee militia, to go down into Alabama because the Creeks have raided an American settlement that was not supposed to be there in the first place, but they were there because they wanted to raise cotton. And so it was this Battle of Horseshoe Bend down in Alabama that really gave Andrew Jackson a place in history. And the United States, we actually didn't really win the War of 1812, but we didn't lose, and we looked at it as a victory. The Americans looked at it as a victory because Jackson was the hero of the last battle of the War of 1812, which was the Battle of New Orleans. And so after the War of 1812 is over, Andrew Jackson is a national hero. He's not just somebody who lives over here on the other side of the mountains in the wilderness. He looks like presidential material. The first George Washington won the first war with Great Britain, Jackson supporters would say. Now this man is the second George Washington. So after the War of 1812, the population of Nashville boomed. People are coming in on their way to this other land in other places where they can raise cotton. Now, among the people who come in this next wave, another group of people who moved to Nashville is Dr. Philip Lindsley. Dr. Philip Lindsley is a highly educated scholar. He is from Princeton University, or at Princeton College in New Jersey, and he has been actively recruited to come to Nashville because the citizens see our town growing so fast, they want us to have a proper, nationally recognized college. So they recruit successfully Dr. Philip Lindsley. He comes to Nashville. He gets here on December 24th in 1824, and he gets the University of Nashville really reestablished. It had been established before Philip Lindsley came, but it was really not a well-known institution. And with Dr. Lindsley's presence, they were able to recruit a good many scholars in subjects. So the University of Nashville became one of the nation's leading educational centers. He came, and with that university opening, all manner of people came into Nashville for the purpose of getting an education. And what did Dr. Lindsley call this place? He said, we are making Nashville the Athens of the West. Now today we say it's the Athens of the South, but remember this was the American West in 1824. So we have a very, very prosperous city here. In 1843, the state makes Nashville the capital of our state. Why did Nashville get picked? Because of the Cumberland River. The geographic center of Nashville was actually down in Rutherford County, Smyrna, but because the Stones River on which Smyrna sits is not deep enough for a steamboat, Nashville, where steamboats were coming up and down the Cumberland River all the time, became the state capital. And that brought in people from all parts of Tennessee, but it also, again, made us nationally well known. Now, you know what's going to happen here in this story. The Civil War is going to break out in 1861. And I just want to make a point about Nashville's uniqueness during the Civil War. Nashville was really ambivalent about leaving the Union. And indeed, we had voted once not to leave the Union, and then 3 months later, it was Middle Tennessee that was the deciding factor in Tennessee seceding from the Union. Tennessee became the 11th state to leave the Union, but as a result of the Civil War, Nashville, being the capital, was really important to both armies. And the Union Army took the city of Nashville very, very early in the Civil War. February 1862, they renamed our capital Fort Andrew Johnson, and President Abraham Lincoln said, Nashville has now been brought back into the United States. Now, Confederates didn't agree with him, you understand, but that was his position. So this brought a whole new wave of newcomers to our city in Union Army uniforms. And you know, the people here in town, even if they supported the Confederacy, even if their sons were fighting in the Confederate Army, this was about as safe a place as you could have been during the United States Civil War. And many of these Union officers, when the war was over, they liked what they saw here in Nashville, and they decided to stay. Well, we have another group coming in as soon as the Civil War is over, a group of missionaries who see an opportunity here to build a college to help the former slaves learn to read and write. They come into the area, the American Missionary Association, and found Fisk Free School for Colored, just what it was called in the beginning. It's now Fisk University. It had a very glorious history. It was founded in 1866, right after the Civil War. The Methodists, not to be outdone, they're going to found a university here after the Civil War too, which becomes Vanderbilt University, and that brings in a whole nother group of people wanting to come into our city. Our city celebrates 100 years of cityhood in 1880 with the big celebration, and then in 1897, we were a year off, but in 1897 we celebrated 101 years of being a state with the Centennial Exposition, in which the key feature, the Athens of the South, a Greek temple, the Parthenon, was the key feature of the Centennial Exposition. People from all over the world came here, and many truly loved what they saw, and they stayed. And the town continued to grow. Not only did we have a robust river business of river traffic in and out, we also became a railroad center because railroads saw this as a hub for salespeople to ride their trains to go out into the countryside to sell things to people. And so during this whole long history of Nashville, we have had one group of people after another. Some came along, some alone, some came in families, some came in even religious groups. On some occasions we had entire congregations coming here. We had all sorts of people coming here because they liked what they saw and they wanted to stay and make a contribution. So as you progress around the city during the MyCity Academy, you're going to see this place called all sorts of things. The French River, the river of the Shawnees, it was called Rock City because of the limestone, the Eden of the West. And I have to say something personally about this here, because I came from Texas where it's flat and the trees are short and it's either hot or cold all the time. Some of you, I bet, have been to Texas. Well, I had never seen the spring come or the fall. And I was over at Peabody on the campus living in a dorm, and the sugar maples started turning red, orange, and yellow, and it took my breath away. It was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. And then when the dogwoods and redbuds came out in the spring, I felt that was even more breathtaking. And, you know, spring is just around the corner, and it never ceases to remind me of what a beautiful place we live in. We are an educational center, the Athens of the West, the Athens of the South. Nashville, depending on who does the counting, we've got 12 higher institutions, 12 colleges at least, maybe more, depending on how you count colleges. Because of our interest in religious publishing and the denominations of churches, liking Nashville because it was centrally located, we were referred to as the buckle of the Bible Belt, and some called Nashville the Protestant Vatican. We are the capital of Tennessee. This one is rather more obscure because in World War I, when World War I began in 1914, the DuPont Corporation in Delaware wanted to build a place, a factory to develop a smokeless gunpowder for the war effort. And so they picked a place in one of those bends in the Cumberland River that was really hard to get to and undeveloped. They started buying land from farmers, and they built the DuPont powder plant. And so for a while, Nashville was called Powder City because of that. As business boomed here around the time of World War I, we became known as the Wall Street of the South. We became known after a insurance company decided they wanted to market insurance to rural Tennesseans and rural Americans, country people. They decided to create a radio program. They owned a radio station, We Shield Millions, WSM. That was the motto of their radio station, We Shield Millions. So they created a radio program of country music on Saturday night to help them sell insurance out beyond the city limits of a city like Nashville. That was why we became known as the market of country music. Some people in Nashville did not necessarily like that, but we have all learned to love all kinds of music. And that's another thing I'm so proud of. You can go to the Country Music Hall of Fame, walk across the street to hear one of the best symphony orchestras in the country. You can walk down Broadway and see the next famous person out there on the street playing their guitar, trying to get your attention. And we are now known as Music City, USA. Now, WSM had a radio announcer who gave us that name, but if you go over to Fisk University, and I encourage you to go over there and walk around that lovely campus sometime, they will say that the name Music City was given to Nashville by Queen Victoria when their singers, the Fisk Jubilee Singers, sang for Queen Victoria. So you've got two different versions of how we became Music City, USA. As the mayor talked about, we made this far-sighted decision to consolidate our city and county government, and we became Metro. And Metro is really what has made this city really become such a livable place with greenways, with public libraries, with lots and lots of services here. But for me, and I hope really for all of you, you will be able to call this place home. Thank you very much. Now, I don't want to abuse my time limit here, but I've been given the signal that I can take some questions. I'm very eager to hear your stories and whatnot, but I'm happy to answer any history questions. My hearing is probably not quite as good as the mayor's, so I'll come out into the audience to hear you say your questions. But I'm interested, if any of you have any questions, let me know. History questions? Yes.
So mine's not a history question, but a question to start. I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about Nashville Encyclopedia.
Oh, yes, the magic word, the National Encyclopedia. This is a history project that we undertook about 2 years ago that we hope to go live in September right after school starts. It is an online encyclopedia of Nashville history, and it is the first of its kind here in Tennessee. We are very excited. It is a volunteer effort of volunteer writers, and this is where I could use your help for sure, because you know, we know a lot about the early groups that came to Nashville. We know more about the nomadic hunters than we do some of the current groups who are in Nashville. And so we are looking for volunteer writers wherever you might be from. If you have a community from Ghana, we would love to know about that. And if you have a community we had a very early Egyptian community here down in where Hickory Hollow is. And I mean, this is in the 1800s. We had an Egyptian community, if you can imagine that. So we've had a lot of communities. There is a Sudanese community here. There are multiple groups. And I'd love to have an article in the encyclopedia about every group. It is something that we are rightly proud of because we really have a opportunity for lots and lots of people. So I'm going to be sticking around a little bit, and if you all, when we have a break, want to talk to me about that, I would love to talk to you about that, and I can give you my business card. I know some of you got the information in your notebook as to how to find me. I'm pretty easy to find. Any history questions? Yes, back there at the back. You.
Okay. I was just wondering, I did have to leave the room a little bit before you started, but it sounded to me like the history of Nashville started with the European settlers. So I was just wondering if there's any information about the indigenous populations and what things were like, because they weren't really part of the story.
Well, actually, that's a very good question, because the only difference between the indigenous cultures who were here and the Europeans was that by the time the settlers came over here, all of the written language of any of the people in North America had been destroyed. It's not quite right to say they didn't have a written language, but particularly the Mayas had a very advanced language. And so we look at that period of time when the indigenous people were here as pre-history, simply because their history hasn't been written down. But those stories are very important parts of our story. We have had graves found in several different places, burials of a group of people that we know only as the stone box people, because they created these graves they buried their dead in boxes of sorts out of stone. And there is a good deal of information about their civilizations here. They were largely along the rivers. I can probably email you a whole report of information that a Smithsonian archaeologist did about 1910. Dr. Myers came down here and he found this vibrant the ruins of a vibrant community on the Harpeth River, but on the Davidson County side of the Harpeth River. So if you'll send me an email, I'll be delighted to send you lots of information, because I don't want to imply that that's not part of the story. Everybody has a story. You have one. Everybody in the room has a story, and the challenge of history is making sure your story gets told as well. Now, somebody up here on the front had a question.
Yes. I would like to know the original name of Nashville. I know you talk about how the French name it.
Yeah.
So where does the name come from, Nashville?
Okay, now where does Nashville come from, the name? Francis Nash came from the part of North Carolina that James Robertson and Richard Henderson actually came from, Francis Nash. And so when the settlers got here, when the women and children got here on those boats, the first thing they did was to have a meeting and draw up some rules. we've got to have order here. So they signed a document called the Cumberland Compact, which just says we're going to have some rules. And they named this community for this Revolutionary War soldier who had recently died at the Battle of Brandywine, I think in Pennsylvania, Francis Nash. They named it Nashborough. Borough, the English word for little town. Well, North Carolina was a colony of Great Britain, and then when the British declared that the colonies were indeed going to be independent, when the war ended, North Carolina legislature renamed Nashborough Nashville because the French, who used the word ville, had been on our side during the Revolutionary War. And they also created Davidson County, and North Carolina's legislature named this area Davidson County because William Lee Davidson from North Carolina was killed about 2 months before the surrender of General Cornwallis to General Washington in the Revolutionary War. And some of you, if you've ever been in North Carolina, one of their higher education institutions is Davidson College, which is also named for William Lee Davidson, the same as Davidson County, Tennessee. And we've got Nashvilles in a few places too. There's a Nashville, Indiana, for instance, and there's a few Davidson counties around in the rest of the country. So you'll occasionally see those names, but we were the first Nashville and the first Davidson County. We want to be number one, right? Yes?
I know you talked about the European communities that came to Nashville. I wonder if you could give a sense of when other immigrants have.
Very good question. I was trying to kind of get in as much as I could in my 30 minutes. But let me tell you, it was really quite interesting. And my first claim to fame, I guess I should say, which wasn't much of one, was when I was the mother of my children and we would go into the city cemetery, which is right over here. And I learned a lot about who had come to Nashville there when I was staying at home when my children were really small. The first non-Scots-Irish that came in. There was an Irish Catholic named Hugh Rogan who came in with Robertson. Timothy de Mumbria moved back here. But the first real wave of non-Scots-Irish people were the Irish Catholics who came here in 1820 and 21 specifically to build the bridge over the Cumberland River. They were laborers and they worked for an engineer who had designed the first bridge, and they came in and they stayed, and they had a very a big, robust community that very quickly got political power. We have a lot of immigrants before the Civil War from Germany, from those German states. And so that's thus the name Germantown up there where the farmer's market is. There was a German Catholic church up there, the Church of the Assumption, the Church of the Assumption, but also we had German Jews coming down primarily from Cincinnati. These German Jews came down here before the Civil War, and they established a community, and there were two synagogues up right there where the Bicentennial Mall is. So we had those groups here before the Civil War. And then after the Civil War, we have all sorts of people coming from all sorts of places. Eastern Europe, we have some Italians coming in. I wouldn't say lots of Italians, but we had some Italians coming in. We had some people coming from Armenia into Nashville. And, you know, I just totally randomly ran across this newspaper article last summer that was about 1900, and this big Egyptian population community at Cane Ridge, which really surprised me because Cane Ridge, you know, is kind of at the edge of Davidson County. So does that help? And, you know, any more information, be sure to email me. I would love to carry on this conversation. Yes, sir.
Well, I got a question about the Indian.
Uh-huh.
I don't know, there might not be a short answer, but when they were living in part of Tennessee, those tribes, and the newcomers were trying to push them, what happened with them? And what is, I mean, whether
Okay, that's a very good question. What happened to these tribes that were living here? You know, anytime you are oppressed, whether injustice is brought to you, anytime you experience oppression because of who you are or anything, you've got some choices here. So one choice is that you can fight and resist. And some of the Cherokees actually tried that. They broke away from the tribe and went down to the area close to Chattanooga, and they became the Chickamauгans. That was a branch of the Cherokees. The Cherokees, one path is resistance, another path is compromise. And the Cherokees, more than any other tribe, tried to compromise. Let's make a deal. We'll give you a little more land, and we'll try to be respectful of your rights, and you be respectful of ours. But the problem was the population of the settlers was growing a whole lot faster than the population of the Cherokees. The Cherokees allowed their children to be baptized, to become Christians. Missionaries taught those children to read using the Christian Bible. They decided to have property rights, fences, and in some cases the Cherokees even owned slaves. And yet nothing they did was enough. When Andrew Jackson became president, Indian Removal Act was passed. And so the Cherokees, they were trying to be good American citizens. They had adopted a constitution. They had a capital down in New Ashota, which is just south of Chattanooga. And so what did they do when Andrew Jackson's Congress passed the Indian Removal Act and Jackson himself signed it into law? They went to court. A good thing, you know, that's what happens here a lot. They sued, saying that we have a right to this land. The Supreme Court Chief Justice actually decided on the side of the Cherokees, but the President of the United States refused to agree with the Supreme Court decision. It's a very interesting story, and another time we have to talk about the Trail of Tears, because the Trail of Tears, which was the Cherokees' route to get to Oklahoma, was right across downtown Nashville. They crossed the Cumberland River right here. So it's a really interesting story. And I'll tell you one more resource. I've seen her somewhere around here. Go up to the Nashville room. You will love it up there. They've got all sorts of books and things. The Metro Archives is on the 3rd floor here. You're going to have a tour this afternoon, and you can find any information about that kind of history up there, and the staff is really great at both places.
And speaking of the library, we're actually about to start our tour of it, so please join me in thanking Dr. Busey.
Yes, I'll be glad to
And Dr. Busey's information is actually also in your class binders, so her contact information, I know hopefully some of you will have some follow-up questions for her. But for now, we are going to start our library tour, and before we do,
I'm trying to figure out where I put my notes. I was going to get my cards.
we're going to do the library tour, and then we're going to have lunch. Yes, I'll be in this room, so you can feel free to leave all of it in here. And if you need to, the restrooms are just back there, so before we leave for the tour, if you all need to do that, that is fine. But right now, I'm going to turn it over to Elise
So I'm going to try to get to you before you all get up and leave.
Yes.
I am just going to introduce Megan Godby, and she is a star in the community and certainly a bright spot of the Nashville Public Library. I want to say welcome. If you haven't heard that 25 times yet, I'm saying it. Think of it as 50 times. And now I'm going to introduce Megan. I know some of you know her. If you don't, get to know her. She is the Adult Literacy Coordinator here at Nashville Public Library with over 10 years of experience in the field of English as a second language education. Megan has taught a broad spectrum of learners, from preschoolers to adults. She has served as a USCIS designated school official. She's managed student visas and worked as an international student advisor. In her current role here at the library, Megan leads our adult literacy and learning initiatives, which includes developing partnerships in order to make the library a more welcoming and inviting space for immigrants. She manages our Pathway for New Americans initiative here at the library, which includes information corners at all of our library branches with useful information about English as a second language, about citizenship, and about community resources for new Americans. So it's a pleasure to introduce Megan Godby.
But before we do, I just want to say a couple words about Elise, because she's such a great asset, and I'm hoping that you all have some time to connect with her too. Elise has been in Nashville since '81, and she's been with the library since 1985, and she is the Director of Community Engagement. So what she does such a wonderful job at is building new library branches and then really reaching out to the community to get people into the library and then to connect through a number of community partnerships to connect with communities all over Nashville. So I hope you'll take advantage of her. She's a really great resource. And now,
Thanks.
Do an introduction. I want to show you a really useful website. It will take 3 minutes of your time, and then I promise I'm going to lead one of your tours, and Luke's going to lead the other, and we'll take a pit stop first thing, so you'll have a whole 5 minutes to go to the bathroom. So bear with me. I know you've been sitting for a few minutes. You should have picked up a blue folder when you walked in this morning. If you didn't, there's some more outside in the hallway. The blue folder contains information that we have in these corners that we call citizenship corners in 5 library locations and 5 Metro Parks locations. These were developed to give immigrants easy access to all the steps in applying for citizenship, including where they can find places to study for English in the city. So on the right side, you'll see materials provided by the federal government. On the left side, you'll see resources provided by the public library in English and in Spanish. You'll also see a black bookmark that kind of looks like a bumper sticker that has this still, Pathway for New Americans, and the website. So I want to call your attention to the site. It's available in 5 languages, including that you can ask a question to a library staff in Spanish or Arabic, if you so wish. You can ask for a recommendation on an ESL class. We can make referrals like that. And it also contains other study tools for the citizenship tests, like an electronic version of the 100 questions, a video of the actual citizenship test itself that you could preview, a listing of all the nonprofits in the city who offer ESL classes for free or for cost. If you want to explore the site across the top, ooh, now I have a microphone. We have some tabs related to English citizenship. So choose which tab makes most sense for you. And then take advantage of some of our online resources that are available if you have a library card. If you don't have a library card, we can sign you up for one today, so please don't leave your tour without signing up for a library card. And I hope that you'll visit this site. It was developed just for you. My information is on the site as well as a business card inside your folder.